So hello and welcome to another episode of Rebel City Podcast. This will probably be the quickest hour we've ever had in our fucking lives with the amount of stuff that we've got to talk about.
Aye.
It's mental. Where will we start? We start with the COVID inquiry, or?
I mean, I think probably the biggest news has been like the Israel-Palestine stuff. And aye. We don't, it's a topic we don't cover at all. Kind of similar to like Ukraine and Russia in the past. Like, we don't really discuss it a lot, and there's a deliberate reason for that, and it's because there's so much disinformation around it, particularly in like Ukraine and Russia. You know, Ukraine deliberately took a tactic to fight fire with fire in terms of disinformation in this recent war. So, like, talking about it is really difficult when you don't trust a lot of what is being said about it. We've seen that in the very early stages of what was going on in recent weeks in sort of Gaza and Palestine. Obviously, you know, Hamas attacked, was it a music festival to start off with?
Aye, so I think we're like a month ago. No, it was like, was it the 12th of October?
The 7th,
right, okay. Aye, there was a Hamas attack on a music festival, which was horrific.
It was the whole southern border, I think. It was the whole southern border that went under attack, essentially. But the music festival was one of the things going on in the south. But it was like happening, like rockets were going in at other points, and it was a full scale. Organised attack.
A terrorist attack. I think there was something like 350 deaths. In the aftermath of that, obviously, you know, Israel has exerted its right to defend itself, which you can't really argue against. The scale and the proportionality of that response has been absolutely staggering. Not unexpected, because it's not the first time, you know, a couple of hundred deaths have been met with a couple of, or tens of thousands of deaths on the other side.
Have been met with, like, we're talking like how many people died in 9/11 versus the amount of people that died in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're in the millions at this point.
Multitudes of the original crime. And that's probably one of the things that like disappoints me the most about it. Like, I don't want, obviously, anybody to suffer as a result of, you know, terrorism or, you know, the right to defend themselves. You know, we've spoken previous episodes way back in the beginning about, you know, my love for American politics and, you know, how WWE is it sometimes, and part of that was as a result of the West Wing. Like, I was really obsessed with the West Wing as a younger guy, and I was reminded this sort of last week or so about a series of episodes where Sheen, President Bartlett, as his character is, has he's army appointed physician who's just had a new baby. And they're, you know, talking about the joys of being a new father and all this kind of carry on over the course of a number of episodes. And it kind of culminates in this, I think he's like a captain or something, being posted to, you know, a hot zone, a war zone or whatever it is that, you know, America, the fictional America is facing at that point in time. And the president says to him, with a new kid on the scene, just say the word and, you know, I'll make this go away. And he's like, no, it's my duty to serve, like I signed up. Like, you don't dare. Like, take my duty away from me, sort of thing. So kind of goes on, and the end result of that is that the captain, the physician, dies in a helicopter attack, and the president is obviously, you know, devastated, furious. And one of the concerns for the character early in the series is that he was a professor, that he was not a general, he was not, you know, savvy in terms of military and war. And he's trying to make the argument that he wants to, in his anger, go and basically level this country for the outrage of having taken down this American helicopter and, you know, killed this captain. And there's a really, like, interesting sort of series of, like, conversations happening in, like, situation rooms and all the rest of it, where they're basically convincing them that that's no proportionate, and that there's an actual legitimate cost of doing business for this type of thing, and that, you know, he doesn't get it. Why the fuck not? Like, I think it says something along the lines of, you know, we're the greatest empire since the Romans. Like, why can I not, as the president of the United States, go and just wipe this country out for their transgressions? And he's like, because we don't then have any moral authority. When we say to another country, you've just committed atrocities, you can't do that, because they'll instantly turn around and go, well, hold on a minute. You had a helicopter shot down and levelled a country. I mean, there's a proportional response, and that response is somebody takes out a helicopter, you know, they take out an an airport, a military air base or whatever it is. There's, a tit for tat that is like baked into the whole process. And then eventually he kind of obviously gets it and, goes and deals with his grief in this sort of normal way. And that's something that I've not seen here at all in terms of like what's happened in sort of Israel and Palestine in the last few weeks, is that, 300 people were attacked by terrorists. And again, I don't even get why Hamas would, because it's got to be some of the dumbest shit I've ever seen in my life, because Israel now has a pretext to go into the territory and has like waged, war to the extent of like tens of thousands of people now, so that there is no proportionate response for Israel, which I think is something that the international community should be insisting on. But instead what we've got is guys like Keir Starmer, and this has been the disappointing aspect for me as a British citizen, is that, for all intents and purposes, future Prime Minister is out there kind of justifying potential war crimes, especially in the early days where he says we can cut food, we can cut water, we can cut electricity, that's Israel's right. And you're like, that is the dictionary definition of a war crime. And I think he's tried to walk it back. He's had issues with
of course he has.
Muslim councillors resigning and, stuff like that. But that initial reaction here was not a diplomatic statesmanship, was not a peacekeeping. It was about stepping back, throwing your hands in the air and allowing war to escalate beyond control. And that for me again was just so disappointing.
I mean, as fair play to Hamza for,
I mean,
do you know what I mean? He's getting accusations of being all sorts, like in the British press, like south of the border, definitely. I mean, there's been all sorts said about him. The guy's got family in the region, or had family in the region up until very, very recently. But fair play to him. He's one of the very few. I mean, even like we're now seeing the EU commissioners come out and they're going and they're shaking hands with Israel and stuff like that, and it really calls into question, like you're talking about, like the morality of the system, like that actually like runs the world that we live in. There's definitely different parts of the world, like Russia, that don't get run by the same. But in the Western world, Biden's response, the EU's response, the British Prime Minister's response, the leader of the opposition response in the UK has been complete and utter disgraceful.
I mean, Sunak could not get over there fast enough. He has taken a leaf out of Boris Johnson's book with Zelensky and the Ukraine and them being pally-pally and it being a massive boon to him in the polls. And he was on the first flight that he could get to Israel to stand there hoping to get the same kind of political bounce. And it was in no way, shape or form about the protection of life at all. It was about him trying to find something, like we've said in multiple instances to this point, to hang his hat on ahead of an election, or hang his hat on ahead of an election. Like, Hamza Yousaf has been amongst the most dignified international leaders on the face of the planet. Like, not his biggest fan in terms of some of his domestic policies. We've been over that. Like, I think, he's taken over at a time when they're on a bit of a downward spiral. But in this moment, when he had actual like skin in the game, like his level of diplomatic statesmanship is exactly what I wanted to see for Starmer, for Sunak, for Biden. I mean, we spoke about the disinformation that happens in Ukraine and Russia. Like, Biden stood on the White House lawn in the Rose Garden in front of the presidential seal and talked about having seen evidence of 40 babies being beheaded, and it was fucking nonsense.
Well,
and you're like, how the fuck do you know? You're the president of the United States. How do you know? Check that. He said he's seen it. I've seen the evidence, and you're like, that was a blatant lie. Like, why tell that lie? You know what I mean? Like,
well, I mean, we've spoke about this more than a few times, but Biden's a fucking dinosaur. Like, Rishi Sunak is a dinosaur. They're still operating in an age where they're like, these idiots don't know, just, throw out whatever we want to say. What's the message? Throw it out. But we don't live in that world anymore. We now live in an interconnected global world where people are like, well, we're seeing different footage coming from actual people that are in this area. It's got nothing to do with your, to call it what it is, it's propaganda.
Yeah.
Like Israel released I mean, the most hilarious audio the other day being like, this is why we were bombing a hospital. Here's audio of Hamas. It's been translated, by the way, through AI, but here's audio of them saying that they're using ambulances to cart weapons, and it's like...
And this is every expert,
it's like 5 audio experts coming out being like, this has all been doctored. We can tell it's all been doctored, and this is now the world that we live in, and these people are dinosaurs. But, you know, like we're saying, like, thumbs up for Hamza, for everybody else, but Biden, Sunak, they can't come out and oppose Israel. They can't. Like, this is the thing. It's like Israel, as an opinion, I suppose, and like, obviously we're talking off mic before about our own sort of personal vested interest, but in my opinion, Israel is there for a reason. They're there for an absolute a reason, and it's to disrupt that bit of the planet so that we can have uninterrupted access to the natural resources that are in that region. That's my kind of take on it.
I mean, it's not created.
Eh?
That's how it was created, essentially. Like, from the sort of towards the end of the First World War, the French split up the region, and then the Second World War, we needed American backing to finish it.
Yeah, I mean, we
gave Israel over.
We spoke in depth with a previous guest about Churchill. And the sort of things that were going on in the background during the Second World War, and no wanting to end the war and wanting to get first into the Middle East, and we want to be the first one here so that we can control this and control that. So these we're now starting to see the chess game be unravelled in front of us, and we're like, so you got to, I think in this day and age, I think it's right, and I think you've got to put your hands up and say, I am not a terrorist sympathiser. Like, Hamas can get to fuck.
Yes.
Like, civilians, people, innocent people that are in Israel don't deserve to die. This isn't what we're talking about, but what we're talking about is the Israeli government and the military-industrial complex that are and big oil and gas that are now rubbing their hands and foaming at the mouth of the prospect.
Apartheid that's going on in the country.
Because, I mean, some of the response, you're talking about the proportionate response. Well, they've been bombing bits that have gotten no Hamas...
I mean, we need to keep in mind that the Palestinian people at the moment are comprised 50% of children. Like 80% of the population is supported by international aid.
That's it. Like early on in this, I mean, a lot of people would like to think that this started in October. Like,
no,
you need a history lesson, but also, like, the average age in Palestine is 19. That's the average age of that population. They voted for Hamas back in 2005, 2006. You're like, these people weren't born. They weren't adults. Nobody fucking voted for them. They're a terrorist force. And also, if you consider the history of what's went on in that region, desperate people will vote. I mean, the Americans voted for Trump out of desperation. We voted for Boris out of desperation.
Yeah.
So desperate people will do things that don't make sense, and to be like, well, they voted for Hamas. It's like,
when you're in a country when you're in a country that's been so destabilized over so long, what were your options? Your country's been reduced to rubble. You've been given a slither of what you had, and then it was basically a false peace agreement in 2005, 2006 that was never a peace agreement. It was never a ceasefire, really. There was still shells going over the border from Israel, and I'm sure the other way. Like, it's just like you say, this whole thing is fired up right now, and it's interesting because I wonder how much we're going to hear about Ukraine over the next 6 months, because typically they don't have wars. They don't have wars in Ukraine around this time of the year because of the bloody weather. So it was always going to get quiet. So they need something else to crop up. And it's just, it's all very, I
was thinking about this the other day. I was thinking, like, could you imagine if, and see, when I was sort of like thinking about it, I was like, this is so ridiculous. But then I was like, no, but it's kind of what's happening. Can you imagine if a guy, so we'll proportion it right down, a guy for Edinburgh shot 5 people in Glasgow, and Glasgow City Council went, we're going to carpet bomb Edinburgh.
Yeah.
This is the equivalent of what we're doing. It's so fucking batshit crazy.
I think probably the more sort of reasonable comparison in a number of respects, and again, another topic that I generally don't get into because, again, the history, the religious elements to it, you know, I'm not going to resolve this issue by talking about it, is Northern Ireland. And in the days of the Troubles, had the bombing in London as Canary Wharf, and then, you know, nuke Dublin. You know what I mean? Like, it would have been
carpet bomb,
probably a fairer equivalence, but
Island.
It's not proportionate, and that's one of my biggest gripes. You know, what there is a history there, you know, in terms of settlements and the legality. You know, the international community has sat on its hands and let Israel away with a lot. And that's not to say that then justifies what Hamas does. It does not in any way, shape or form.
No, of course not.
And as I say, we now need to get to a point where if we're going to have like a lasting peace, and I know people are talking about ceasefires, no, let's not have a ceasefire because that will just embolden Hamas. And you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Hamas are sitting in tunnels 500 feet underground, like sitting this out. Like, you know that's the case. Like, the people that you are bombing just now are overwhelmingly civilian. Like, we were bombing hospitals. You know, the BBC debunked very thoroughly that sort of claim about, you know, they're, you know, using the hospitals as human shields and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Like, there's even, you know, evidence that, like, you know, routes to and from, like, refugee camps being attacked and stuff like that. Like, this is unacceptable on every level.
Absolutely. Like, earlier in this episode, no, the podcast episode, this episode in the Middle East that we're talking about in the West Bank, Israel told them, if you know, go this way if you want to get out, and then fucking bombed that road.
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, whoever's in charge, Netanyahu, the Israeli administration, they are committing genocide. I don't think there's any way for it to go any other way. And
they're certainly speaking the language of genocide in public.
100%. And to go back to what you were talking about, Northern Ireland, that is one of the very few times, I think, where as a society we've managed to not just wipe somebody off the face of the planet, or just like,
but both sides had to gear up a lot of shit they didn't want to gear up.
Exactly.
Both sides had to gear up stuff that hurt like fuck for it to work.
Absolutely.
And like, what have the Palestinians got left to gear up that will placate what Israel want? Like,
I think that the normal people of Palestine would probably gear up anything for it to stop.
To live in peace.
Aye. But I don't think they'll get that choice. I think they'll, I mean, we're now looking at a couple of million refugees maybe heading to like Egypt, and the religious sectarianism that exists in that region amongst like different factions, Islamic.
Yeah.
It's so dangerous for them.
There are already
so
humanitarian crises in, you know, the Pakistan and Egyptian borders with Afghan refugees and stuff like that. So, yeah, you're taking an already existing problem and multiplying it exponentially.
I mean, Pakistan have also just expelled 1.5
That's exactly what I'm talking about, yeah.
It's, and so, like, it's going to be, that whole region is going to be absolute wildfire.
But don't forget, these people are economic migrants. Like, they're here for your hospital beds, and your jobs. Like this is. I was talking to somebody, and I don't agree with this, but I could almost. I was like, I can see what you're saying, but I don't agree with it. Where he was like, I feel like this had to happen, because the atrocities that have been happening in that region, well, we just ignore it. We're so normalised to it. We're just like, whatever. It felt like it had to become something that's so unacceptable that hopefully in whatever time scale that we're talking,
every 5 to 10 years something happens that we deem so unacceptable that we all wake up and then we realise the futility of it, because the people in charge have no meaningful interest in resolving it peacefully. Like you say, you know, guys like Biden was talking 20 years ago in Congress about how if Israel didn't already exist, they would have to create it to protect American interests. So you'll get that crackpot RFK Jr. just this week essentially equating Israel to having an aircraft carrier parked constantly in the Middle East. You know what I mean? Like, this is why, I mean, the American Congress has now elected its second speaker in 8 months. It's taken weeks and weeks and weeks to do it. They've on the brink of another government shutdown. The guy they've elected, this, you know, consensus candidate, is a gun-toting abortion nut job who, like, has his own son as his buddy. They monitor each other's pornographic usage. Like, this is like some out there batshit Christian mentalist nonsense. And the first thing this guy does with his majority was not avert a government shutdown in America that protects his constituents, it was to put on the table a bill for £14.3 billion in dollars of aid to Israel. You know what I mean? Like,
aid to Israel?
Yeah. One of the...
Wow.
And this is where, again, that initial disappointment about the disproportionate response and our leaders' inaction or sort of failure to like push back against how overwhelmingly violent and oppressive the response was, has now moved into attempts to suppress even sort of wider comment about it, you know what I mean? And that is, again, something that, and particularly in this country, I find extremely worrying. You know, we've had the Labour anti-Semitism scandal in recent years that, you know, saw the end of Jeremy Corbyn. And yeah, we don't know really what extent that is actually true or not. There are, you know, pretty strong arguments and, you know, films and whatever else that break down how fabricated a lot of it was. We're seeing a lot of that just now, where people are equating criticism of the Israeli government with criticism of people of the Jewish faith, and I don't think that's particularly fair. Like, I think we've covered on a number of occasions on the podcast, like, we do not give a fuck what imaginary friend you talk to. Like, what we judge on is how you behave as a person and the behaviour that you condone in others. And I think across the board, you know, we're politicians, we're leaders have failed on that front. And then you go to America, as you say, they're putting $14 billion of aid towards Israel. There's a woman, Talib, she's a congresswoman, she's an American of Palestinian heritage.
Right.
She's the only Palestinian American in Congress. And she got up and spoke in favour of the Palestinian people in Congress. I think during this debate on the £14 billion, she was actually censured by the House. And like, that's not hugely surprising given there is a slight Republican majority at the moment, so they can do that anyway. But 22 of your Democratic colleagues joined in and voted with the Republicans to censure a Palestinian speaking up in favour of Palestine in the American Congress. And I think, sounds like a daft one to raise up, but that, what's her name? She's the ex-porn star. The Mia Khalifa.
Right,
She was out posting allegations that between those 22 Democrats, they had accepted between $35,000 and like $1.4 million from like pro-Israeli like super PACs and stuff like that. So the reason why they were actually like throwing one of their own colleagues under the bus was allegedly to keep Israeli money coming in and funding their campaigns. And you're like, you know, we're let through the looking glass on this, where you can't, as an actual Palestinian, say, this is wrong and I want to do what I can to help my people and stop their suffering. And your own team are like, fuck you, like, don't mess with my money. You know what I mean? Like, that's
what it comes down with guys like Starmer. That's what it comes down, I think, to quite a lot.
I think he created an anti-Semitism row and now doesn't want it to come back and bite him on the arse, because now he's used it to oust Corbyn. He can't then, you know, be on the receiving end of it by not
I'm sure
pushing back on Israel.
Definitely,
you know what I mean?
like Israeli money like running through the Labour Party as well, and there definitely will be. If it's in American politics, it will be in our politics. I think for us, you know, like I'm not being like, let's move on, you know, like, but Suella Braverman's comments about hate marches and try to stoke violence this weekend, while flag shaggers and Palestinian protesters are probably going to meet at some point at the Cenotaph or in central London, central Glasgow. There's protests and
counter protests,
remembrance.
Remembrance stuff.
Like remembrance stuff. There was something that happened that I wanted to talk about in Edinburgh that
didn't happen
in Edinburgh, where wrongly, in my opinion, Palestinian protesters or anti-genocide protesters in Edinburgh confronted a veteran who was there selling poppies. I don't think that that's right.
The Police Scotland have said there's no evidence of that happening.
There's a video that they went up to him, so they confronted him. That's it.
Okay.
They went up and basically went fuck off, I think, was basically what happened.
I've not seen the video.
Neither.
I seen the statement, and maybe the statement was more whatever happened did not equate to a crime.
He said they get punched,
right?
Or I don't know if he did or if Poppy Scotland or whatever, but it was reported that he was physically attacked by these protesters, and he wasn't. There's a video that's went up where a couple of them go up and they're basically like, I think they're basically like, away you go. Now, like, I mean, during 2014, I was standing on a Virgin Media caravan, and a guy for the Yes movement was basically like, get your fucking British, get to fucking. I was just pure, aye, all right, mate. So these things happen. There's dates everywhere.
Yeah.
You're not automatically some sort of like, you know,
enlightened soul.
Exactly.
Because you happen to be into the same thing I'm into.
100%, and you're out there protesting. I think a lot of people like to think that that's the case, that, you know, but that's not true.
Groupthink.
But they went up in Edinburgh, and I think this is a good example of, like, basically propaganda, like low level. You know, like the type of stuff where you'd be like, oh, fucking hell, like if it was pre-internet, before somebody's like, well, I've got iPhone footage of actually what happened and we'll leak it online. Before that, you'd have probably just been like, fucking hell, man, they shouldn't be doing that. Where, you know, the guys said that he get punched and, you know, like, he didn't. It's the same way guys like Andy Ngo in America, that's like, these BLM people attacked me, and it's like, no, they didn't. They hit you with a milkshake, mate. There was no cement in it. There was no risk to your life. There was no blah blah blah. But this is a good example of how they really twist these types of things, they create these narratives. I also seen that YouTubers and TikTokers were getting emails being like, if you do like pro-Israeli posts on your TikTok and blah blah blah, we'll give you money. And they were coming out and being like, look at it. And
was it QXC or whatever his name is? The reaction streamer was doing a stream where he was reacting to bombs dropping on Gaza.
Right. So there was other people. So he's definitely took the payment then. Do you know what I mean?
This guy is one of the most unscrupulous. I mean, reaction content is a complete sham anyway. You know what I mean? But he's the worst of the worst. He's the guy that put somebody else's video in. It was a 15-minute video. He walked away, came back 12 minutes into the video, and then like started talking to his chat. And it's like it breaks every fair usage policy ever. But he was doing crass kind of like reaction streams to like watching news footage of Gaza being like leveled.
Seeing like the days before that, I'd seen loads of people, and I noticed it myself. Arnold Schwarzenegger's Twitter account, Instagram account. You know, all of these high Hollywood celebrities, they all did very similar posts, and then you see like, you know, TikTokers getting money to do these posts, and you're like, this is just complete narrative control, complete propaganda. And I think that's what people need to wake up. See, if people are just reading The Sun, the Daily Mail, watching the TV, you need to realise that you are getting a complete controlled message. And go out there and broaden your bloody horizons of like how you consume media. But what I will say is, for my own well-being and my own protection, I turned off all sensitive media on Twitter, because I was just getting so upset at seeing dead bodies on my Twitter feed.
It's not what I'm there for.
It's like,
I was there to laugh. I joined Twitter to laugh at Rangers, not to like watch babies being like torn apart. I think for me, like I get what you're saying with all of that. Like I think there are one of the things that has given me hope through it is seeing how many people around the world are like, no, fuck this.
Ordinary people.
Who are actually like tuned into what's been going on over a long period of time, who maybe don't know every ins and out like us. Like we don't know every in and out. Like, as I said, there is a level of deliberate ignorance that this issue gets to me because, and like you say, it's because it's extremely fucking hard. Like, we are not going to resolve a conflict that has flared up and existed for, in one form or another, you know, potentially millennia. You know what I mean? In one form or another, that part of the world has been in conflict for one reason or another, you know, as far back as fucking time is remembered. You know what I mean? Like, so sitting, you know, getting into on a podcast like this is not going to answer or resolve anything. And, you know, but seeing other people getting beyond that apathy, beyond that sort of self-protection, and getting out into the streets and actually being like in their hundreds of thousands, weekend in, weekend out, all over the world, actually like peacefully protesting and trying to force their governments into actually taking the type of action that we're talking about, actually like having the kind of stances that are about peace, that are about reconciliation, that are about actually like reconstruction and like a fair resolution to this issue. Unfortunately, we live in a world where I think protest has been useless for a very, very long time. It's great to see it on the streets. I'm not on the streets myself because, you know, ever since like the Iraq war, the governments are painfully aware that they can just fucking ignore you and do whatever they want. You know what I mean? Like, and on topics like this, the government policy does not. The government might change. The government policy on this will not change.
No,
you know what I mean? Like,
this is this is an actual like Western global thing.
Yes, this is agreed at every level of governance.
100%.
For the EU to NATO, on the way up and down. Like, so a change in government will not change the governmental stance on this. And I hate to like be negative in that respect, but you know, the people who have went out and actually protested and actually tried to like influence this conversation with their government are to be commended, and like, but they're fighting a losing battle.
Britain had their chance with Corbyn, and we listened to the wrong people when it came to that man. You know, like he's one of the very few people who have been up for leadership positions, and I'm talking about like UK, you know, different, you know, Wales and maybe Northern Ireland, Scotland or whatever, different kettle of fish sometimes, but he's one of the very few in the last, for when I can remember, maybe, you know, John Smith, or that's actually seemed to have some sort of fucking integrity or some form of fucking morals about him, or finger on the pulse when it comes to certain things, you know what I mean? But what you're seeing is, I think that maybe it's my echo chamber, maybe it's not, but the majority of people disagree with the sort of like, but the majority of people are now like, let's have a fucking ceasefire, let's have a break.
I mean, that's the bare minimum we need to have here. Is like, this is people throwing rocks versus people with state-of-the-art AI-guided missile systems. Like, this is, you know, David and Goliath for the 21st century, you know what I mean? Like, which probably is maybe not the one I should have went with there, but, you know, given the wider context. But you know what I mean? Like, it's... people throwing rocks versus people with, like, missiles. It's not a fair fight. And, like, the overwhelming majority of people being affected by it are civilians.
Yeah.
The overwhelming majority of those are children. Like, and again, almost everybody affected by it is already living off of international aid. They don't have homes, they don't have food, they don't have money, and now they don't have gas, electricity or water. You know what I mean? Like, this is not a fair fight. This is not a war, and this is one of the things that bothers me again in the media, is how they talk about the Israeli-Palestine, Israeli-Gaza war. Like, this is not a war. Like, a war has parity. A war is two sides fighting against each other. What you have is a small group of terrorists versus an international country with like a consensus of governments across the world feeding them aid, military aid, financial aid. Like, they have an unlimited ability to wage war on a population that has no way whatsoever of defending itself. This is not a war.
Yeah,
you know
I think what I mean? The people that are backing it up and are either invested in it financially with some of the politicians, they'll be getting funding and blah blah blah, and it's self-preservation. I think maybe ignorance comes into it, but I think at worst there's like a sociopathic element to this, like a proper like evil wanting a population of people wiped off the face of the planet, like an ideological nutcase like element to this, where it's like they can't be reasoned with and they won't be told. And I've been seeing a lot of videos about the people within Israel, and people normal people that live within Israel are just as much a victim of this as anybody else, because can you imagine the information that they're getting if what we're getting is like
there are huge swathes of the Jewish population both in Israel and around the world who also want this to stop, like who are also dead against this. Like, so it's not even about, you know, Jews versus Muslims, because, huge percentages of the Jewish population all around the world are like, not in my name, you know what I mean? Like, both in Israel and beyond it, you know what I mean? And that's something that has been extremely encouraging. But yeah, Netanyahu and particularly high-ranking members of the Israeli government, the language and the rhetoric that they have used has been that of crazed genocidal maniacs.